Hello and welcome to this Legal Week video in association with Deloitte. With me here in the studio is Alex Sharpe. She's a partner at Deloitte. She heads up the UK Family Enterprise Consulting arm and she's also a member of the global team. Hello Alex.
Hello.
And so what are the issues that families are struggling with right now in your experience?
Families in the main, we find, struggle with issues around communication, relationships, family dynamics. I think many people have difficulties with their families and their family relationships, but when you have a family who are also making commercial and financial decisions together, then things become even more complex. That translates into potential for conflict, sibling rivalry, accentuated, and from a practical perspective, difficulties in decision making and working together on an everyday basis.
So tell me a bit more about family governance. How important how important is that in building this kind of background or this that you describe?
Well, interestingly, what we find is that often families leap to family governance as the solution to some of these issues which are actually more personal and often emotional issues. So they look to try and solve what some people call the soft issues, actually with technical, structural or legal solutions, which obviously don't really get to the heart of the issue.
They all know about family governance. I mean, is it something that they're kind of born with? I mean, is it something that is part of the family structure, this concept?
So any family who invest together or who are in business together have natural governance. Family governance just literally means what and how a family work together and operate, so how they make their decisions, how they organise themselves with each other and also in relation to their business. However, where families tend to want to make changes is to move from what tends to naturally be something quite informal to something more formal. And there's the idea that through the formalisation of their family governance processes, that actually this will help with the family relationship issues that I've talked about.
But there's a bit of a danger that they see it as a sort of solution to the problem.
I think that's exactly right. So in our experience, actually, yes, family governance is absolutely necessary. It's just not enough. So families need to make sure that they have the processes, the practices, the protocols in place to allow them to work constructively, to allow them to work effectively and make good decisions in relation to their wealth. But actually, it's not just around having a blueprint for success. It's actually around the day-to-day relationships and communication between the family members.
So what's best practice when it comes to family governance?
I don't think there is any. I actually think when it comes to family governance, it's absolutely about what is a family looking to achieve. So unless a family has clarity of vision and clarity of purpose, then it's actually impossible to design an effective family governance system. It'd be like trying to get somewhere with a map when you don't know where you're going. So best practice for family governance is actually acknowledging that it needs to start from a place of intention. So what is the purpose of the family's wealth? Why are they in business together? Why are they choosing to co-invest? Who do they want to be as a family? And then from there, you can start to design a practice and a system which actually allows them to work together to reach their full potential.
If you're advising them, how would they start formulating that?
Well, I think very often a family member recognises that either there's an issue in terms of how they're operating together today, or that actually there's the potential for conflict in the future. And there's the recognition that getting clarity around how the family are going to make decisions, how they're going to govern their assets for the long term, is something which is a necessary component of ensuring that they're able to make successful transitions from one generation to the next. However, what we find is that there are very few families who actually have the sophistication from a communication perspective to be able to go through that journey themselves. Because very often that person who has recognised the need to formalise things, to start to have conversations around roles and responsibilities and those sorts of matters, very often the rest of the family may view that person as having a particular point of view or agenda. So having someone objective who's able to guide the family through a process, in more cases than not, is very effective, because, as I said, there are very few families who actually have the ability to have some of these conversations on their own, which can be very sensitive and very difficult.
So you bring in somebody from outside that you can trust, but also can deal with presumably extremely confidential information and rivalries and all sorts of undercurrents that you've got to bring to the surface.
So absolutely. I think the importance of having someone from the outside is around having someone who's objective, so is not going to take sides, is actually going to see the family as a whole, if you like, as their client, and someone who is going to be able to deal with absolutely confidential information, not necessarily financially confidential, but confidential from the perspective that actually, in order to deal with the sorts of issues we highlighted at the outset, you need to be able to understand what's really going on in the family. And often what's really going on in the family involves some difficult stories from the past, and looking to the future, it's obviously around having conversations on topics like death, divorce, competence, things which can be really tricky.
So you make it sound as if it's something new. It's almost for families who've come across wealth, sort of first generation wealth, is where they won't have had this concept before. Is that the case, or do families that have successfully managed wealth through several generations, do they sometimes get to an impasse where they need fresh ideas or new advice?
Absolutely. So we see the most successful families taking a step back in terms of going through a very significant review process, probably every generation. But in addition to that, they also look every 3 to 5 years in terms of what they're doing, how they're operating. Is that still relevant? Is it still fit for purpose, given the evolving nature of the family, the business, the environment, etc.? So I think very often families are looking to make sure that they're still doing things in a way which is appropriate. In addition to that, I think the sorts of issues that families go through can be triggered by particular catalysts. So, for example, if a family has a significant liquidity event on the horizon, then the landscape for them, really, between the family and the enterprise is going to be very different. So they may want to regroup and think about what does that mean in terms of their sense of identity, their sense of purpose, how they're going to work together going forwards. Or it may just be that at a generational change, there needs to be a reconsideration of how things are done. If you think about, say, a group of siblings, the way that they get on is going to be completely different to a group of cousins. Siblings grew up in the same households, they have innate problem-solving skills that cousins simply don't have. And that translates into needing to do things differently from a governance perspective, but also from the perspective of making sure that the next generation understand each other, both in the context of the family, but also in the context of their roles and relationships with each other in terms of looking after their co-investments. And
so how, in your experience, does it go wrong?
I think a couple of examples come to mind in terms of when family governance has gone wrong. The first is a family where they very much focused on the family governance. They very much focused on getting very detailed protocols and procedures and rules written down, and spent a lot of time, as I understood it, they came to me after this process, going back and forth in terms of details and wording. And actually they spent 2 years on it, and they had what I call governance fatigue, if you like. And actually all that had happened is that they'd spent all this time arguing about a document, and over that time had actually annoyed each other. So in that particular case, what was missing really was the focus on understanding each other's personal aspirations, on understanding each other's strengths, each other's weaknesses, talking about what they actually want, how things will work in practice, as opposed to thinking about the theory and writing it down in a document. So I think one of the lessons from that absolutely is that, yes, getting the actual governance structure written down is important. But in addition to that, it's also really important that a family spends time together having really good conversations about who they are and what they want. The other example is a case, and I think probably a lot of people have seen similar examples of this, where a patriarch was looking to develop family governance. But actually, what he was really trying to do was to set up structures in order to rule things from the grave, effectively.
Right.
And so what he couldn't understand is why, having gone through a process with one of his advisors, why it was that his children were not embracing the governance system that had been created.
So it made things worse, not better.
Absolutely. And in that particular case, where he went wrong was that the approach wasn't inclusive. So rather than bringing his family to the table with him to say, okay, let's create a shared vision together. Let's figure out how we can make this transition work. He sat in a vacuum, came up with some rules, and his kids simply didn't connect with those. They didn't feel ownership of them. So I think the way in which you go about developing a family governance system is really important as well. That inclusivity is key.
So we know that when things go wrong, it can get very public and it can fuel lots of headlines. But there are also plenty of examples numerous examples. They don't get the headlines because they're going well. So what does it look like from a family governance point of view when it's working well?
When it's working well, first of all, as you say, you normally don't hear about it. But I think importantly, there is a sense within the family of a common purpose. There's a shared vision, a shared set of values. The family feel able to have difficult and uncomfortable conversations. In addition to that, they're still nimble. They're still quick at making decisions in relation to their investments. I mean, that's one of the key advantages that a family has, is that actually they are able to cut through bureaucracy. They can make quick decisions. So when family governance is working well, they are still able to maintain that nimbleness.
They're working like a team.
They're working like a team, a multi-generational team, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Alex. And thank you for watching this Legal Week video in association with Deloitte.